or two systems of courts?
10, Mississippi.
Do the 14th. All right, Secretary of State.
Secretary of State
Deals with everything outside of America.
deals with everything outside.
Hi, and welcome back to Mr. Raymond's Civics EOC Academy, where today we're going to be looking at the media in politics. Now, last time we looked at candidates and the ways in which they campaign, their advertising, issue-based platforms, debates, and what are known as super PACs. So be sure to check that out if you haven't already. And today, as you can see from our benchmarks, we are going to examine the impact of media as it monitors and influences the government, as well as analyze media bias, symbolism, and what is known as propaganda. And just a reminder, teachers, that this lesson plan and PowerPoint are available at Teachers Pay Teachers. Just search for Mr. Raymond Civics EOC Academy. So, what is the media? Well, for our purposes, we are going to be looking at mass media, and that includes any type of political communication that the people get from television, the radio, newspapers, and more, the internet. And in particular, we're going to focus on the press. Now, the press is a term that we use to describe the people who report the news. So America has a strong tradition of what is known as freedom of the press. This is the ability to report the news without the government telling them what they can and cannot report. We see this quote from Thomas Jefferson, quote, "Our liberty depends on the freedom of the press, and that cannot be limited without being lost." In other words, our freedom depends on a free press to ensure that the government does not become tyrannical. Remember, tyranny is one of our key words this year, and this means when the people in charge abuse their power. So we find freedom of the press in the First Amendment, which we'll be covering in more detail soon. We see up here that the First Amendment is what gives us our big freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly and petition, and the freedom of the press. Now, freedom of the press, the ability to write whatever you want, is something that we take for granted because it's something that Americans, for the most part, have enjoyed for over 200 years. So we might assume that people enjoy this privilege all over the world, but if you look at this map, we see that the majority of the world has a press in which the government has some control over the news that gets reported. And in certain countries, some of the ones in black and red, the government has complete control over the media and the news that gets reported. So chances are they aren't going to tell the people when they're doing something wrong. And in some cases, they're going to straight up try to brainwash the people. So at the beginning of the year, we learned about the duties and responsibilities of citizenship. And one of the responsibilities is to stay informed. And this goes hand in hand with voting. After all, how are you going to know who to vote for and what issues are important to you if you aren't informed? And this is what we turn to the media for. Now, why is the media so important to candidates and those holding elected positions? Because this is the primary source of information on those candidates and the issues. And this can make or break their success, both for getting elected and for the direction that they will take on the issues. Now, it is crucial for politicians to use the media. They use the media to push their agendas and their campaigns, and politicians grant interviews, they have press conferences as a way of shaping media coverage. They also take their message to the media to try to increase public opinion, to put pressure on lawmakers for the things that they want to get done. Now, because the media plays such a crucial role in deciding who we are going to elect to lead our country or state or city, and how this will shape the government's response to the issues we care about, the voting public must consider media bias when getting their news. We discussed bias in our previous video. This means having a prejudice either for or against someone or something, and the media, just like the people, just like the voting public, can be biased. Now, in the old days, like when I was young, when there was only 3 TV stations and no internet, the media had a responsibility to remain non-biased, and the word for that is objective. Now, the network news and most newspapers today still try to remain objective, even though they're accused of leaning either towards the Republicans or Democrats. Actually, it seems that they're accused more often by Republicans as being liberal, which means Democrats. Cable news stations such as Fox or MSNBC can be more biased, and the internet is just usually the center of a much more biased news coverage. So Fox News is accused of being extremely conservative, and I'm not sure Fox would even dispute that. Therefore, they are usually more critical of Democrats. The same is true in reverse for MSNBC, who seem to favor the Democrats over the Republicans. So you must be aware of media bias. To stay informed and educated, it's important that you look for bias in news coverage. And I would recommend trying to see both sides of every issue. Consider the pros and the cons, and keep in mind that there are 2 sides to every story. But the best you can do is look for that bias to make sure that you are not being influenced one way or the other. And this leads to a question as to the effect that the media has on us, on what is known as public opinion. In our previous video on political parties, we noted that the country is pretty evenly divided between Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And independents are the ones who don't have a party affiliation. They swing back and forth between the parties depending on who is perceived as doing a better job. Public opinion is a vague phrase that we use to describe the way that the masses feel about the issues. One thing that must be considered is the effect that the media has in shaping public opinion. The media can have a huge effect on public opinion based on what they choose to cover, the coverage that they give for the candidates. However, as people have much wider range of choices with the internet and cable TV to get their news compared with the 3 TV channels I grew up with, the views and different perspectives available are greatly increasing. But remember, a good voter should consider is, hey, am I being persuaded by the media coverage? Now, in a country of 300 million people, it's hard to gauge exactly which way the voting public feels about candidates or the issues. So groups conduct what are known as public opinion polls. A poll asks questions to, hopefully, a wide range of people from different backgrounds and ages to get a sense of public opinion. Government officials use polls to get a sense of what the people want them to do. And here we see a poll about what people feel should be the policy for illegal immigration. Here's a poll asking Maine residents how they feel about a wind farm. And here we see a poll about who they are going to vote for. And polls are definitely not 100% accurate. But the media and government use polls to try to get a sense of how people feel about the issues and who they're going to vote for. Now, Americans have looked to different forms of media over the years to get their news. Early on, newspapers dominated as a source of news. In those days, most voters had never heard or seen their politicians speak. Radio changed all of that and became the go-to source for government officials trying to reach the voting public. However, politicians still enjoyed a greater sense of privacy in those days. For instance, Franklin D. Roosevelt, pictured here, was almost never seen in his wheelchair. So the greater voting public was almost unaware of his condition. But the radio allowed people to hear their leaders, and FDR was great on the radio. Television was another game changer for political campaigns, and this was never better illustrated than by the famous presidential debate between Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy. Those who had listened to it on the radio thought that Nixon had won the debate. But for those who watched on TV, the charismatic JFK, who looked tan and youthful, was the clear-cut winner. So from then on, the way a politician presented themselves on video became an important selling point in elections. Of course, this leads to the question, where do most Americans turn to get their news? And what impact will this have on politics going forward? We see from this graphic that most Americans still get their news from TV, But if we look at the younger generations, they are mostly turning to the internet for their news. For this reason, candidates for political office are increasingly creating a strong online presence to reach younger voters. So where do you get your news from? I hope it's not Instagram. Okay, so some of the last things we need to know. Government officials use what is known as propaganda as a way of influencing the public. Now, propaganda is meant to persuade the people to feel or act a certain way, and we often see propaganda campaigns during times of war, as some of these posters show. Government will play on the public's patriotic emotions to get them to accomplish certain things or feel a certain way, like helping the war effort. Sometimes governments will use fear as a way of getting their message across, such as this poster pushing the people to fear spies who might be looking for secret information. Loose lips might sink ships. So propaganda uses images and messages to work on the public's feelings. And this isn't just from the government. There are different propaganda techniques that candidates will use to help their campaigns. And this one is known as testimonials. Testimonials is where a candidate will use celebrities to show their support. Here we see Barack Obama with a big supporter, Oprah Winfrey. Katy Perry recently performed and spoke out in favor of candidate Hillary Clinton for president. Arnold Schwarzenegger has spoken out for several Republican candidates. Gary Busey recently gave his support for Donald Trump. I'm not sure that will help that much. And Donald Trump's a celebrity in his own right. So these celebrities give their testimonials in favor of a candidate. Another propaganda technique is known as plain folks appeal. And this is where a candidate will show themselves doing something that makes them look like an average Joe, going to some sporting events or drinking beer. They just want to be seen as plain old folks. Another propaganda technique is what's called bandwagon. And maybe you've heard this expression. We use it a lot when we describe sports teams. When they're doing really well, all of a sudden you'll see a lot more fans than when they're not doing well. That is similar with politics. I like to describe the public as having a herd mentality. When a few of the herd head in one direction, the rest will follow along. And candidates will sometimes exaggerate their following, hoping that the people will think, all these people like this person, maybe I should too. They will try to exploit opinion polls, and the expression that often goes with bandwagon is everybody's doing it, so you should too. Now, one of our last things to consider, and we have another Thomas Jefferson quote here that says, "Where the press is free and every man is able to read, all is safe." Now, what does he mean by that? The press is sometimes referred to as the fourth branch of government, or the fourth estate. And this nickname speaks to the importance that the press plays in government. The press not only educates the people on who to vote for and what issues they need to deal with, but they also keep an eye on the government to stop them from making decisions that are going to be bad for the people. It's hard for the government to do things in secret without the people knowing. The press keep an eye out for government corruption, which in the old days was a big problem, and that's where government officials maybe take money illegally. The press has also exposed a lot of shady dealings with government officials breaking the law. Probably no bigger example than the Watergate scandal with President Nixon. Reporters with the Washington Post newspaper who broke the story. Here we see them, Woodward and Bernstein. Now, unfortunately for politicians, the media also really scrutinizes their private lives as well. But it's important to think of the media as the watchdog. The watchdog keeps an eye on you, and they make sure you're not doing anything bad. And if you are, they will bite you. All right, finally, one last thing we have to look at is symbolism. In political communications, there's a lot of symbolism that's used, especially in political cartoons. Look for animals such as the donkey for Democrats or elephant for Republicans. Uncle Sam always represents the American government. And like everything we have covered today, the more you follow the news, making yourself a more informed citizen, the more all of these propaganda techniques and media bias and symbolism, they're going to become more familiar to you. So next up, we're going to be covering interest groups. Here we see three: the NAACP, PETA, United Auto Workers. But before we do, let's review. Okay, so what are different types of mass media? You probably are very familiar with these: newspapers, radio, television, the internet. Which amendment protects freedom of the press? It's not the second, it's the first. The First Amendment gives us our big freedoms. Politicians can gauge public opinion by looking at, they conduct these and the media conduct them. They're called public opinion polls. What type of information can be found in this image? What is that? Look, it's during times of war. Buy bonds. That is propaganda. What do you call the propaganda technique when a politician gets a celebrity to give their endorsement? They are testifying. They are giving their testimonial. Justin Bieber, he favors, I don't know who. What do you call the propaganda technique when a politician does something to look like a regular old American, that's plain folks appeal? What do you call it when a newspaper or channel favors one candidate or party over the other? We know that then they are prejudiced, they are biased, media bias. What do you call the role of media to catch the government when they do something wrong? They're keeping their eye on them. They are the watchdog. All right, so up next we have political interest groups. Be sure to subscribe, people. Just a reminder, teachers, that this PowerPoint with a variety of lesson plans and activities is available at Teachers Pay Teachers, just $1.99. And please subscribe, people. Thanks for watching.